And hello! Welcome everyone to my presentation where I teach you about the realistic social dynamics of teenagers being in charge of stuff. It's going to be a really fun time. So, to start off with, here is my personal experience, because I'm going to be openly honest with you. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about has to deal with my own personal experience of being a teenager who was in charge of a lot of stuff. And I'm not a teenager anymore, but holy cow, I was constantly in charge of things as a teenager, and now, as an adult, my job is at a school where I get to watch different teenagers and kids be in charge and how they respond to that. So, when I was 15, I started a event that and I was in charge of a lot of different people there. From the ages of 16 to 19, I was on a board of creative directors. That's the best way I know how to describe it. We're going to call it a science camp, but that's not what it was. And when I was 18, I co-founded an LLC that was focused on motivational speaking and self-help. So that's all about me, but throughout this presentation, you're going to be focusing on your own character. So let's talk about that for a second. Actually, we need to have a disclaimer, because a lot of this presentation, like I said before, is based on my personal experience. But I have far from the only experience, and a lot of the stuff that happens in your book is going to differ from my experiences, and we're going to talk about how to account for that later on. And also, a lot of what I'll be speaking about applies not just to teenagers, but to adults and children who are in charge of things too. Because turns out that people are really similar no matter what kind of stage of life they're in. Okay, so we're going to be broadly encompassing a lot of things, and I think everything we'll be talking about today will fall into one of these three categories that will vastly determine your character's experience. And those are expectations, so the expectations that society has for your teen leader, and also the expectations they have for themselves. Their followers, so, their followers and why they follow them, and also their competency. Depending on the different mashup of these, you could have a totally different story and dynamic. Okay, so I would like to have audience participation. I'm used to live audiences, and obviously that's not what's going on right now. Well, kind of. Like, you know how it is. So, what I want you to do is I want you to choose a character in your story who fits these criteria. They are a teenager, so 13 to 19 years old, and they're in charge of something. It could be the school dance committee, it could be a kingdom, it could be a dystopian rebellion, I don't care. And throughout this presentation, you're going to be answering questions about this particular character and writing stuff down, so get up a notepad, or like if you actually have a physical notebook, like open that up as well. Whatever you have, I want you to be writing stuff about that as well. But I also want you to be able to share with the other people in this class. So we're going to do something a little bit different, and I really hope it works. I don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to put you into partnerships. So throw up on the Discord that you're available for a partner and you'd like a buddy, and then someone will come and respond to you and say, hey, I'm going to be your buddy, and then you can have like a private chat where you can talk to each other, and it'll be a good time. Again, I don't know if this is going to work, but that's future Quiana's problem, not mine. I will also, like, the present version of myself will also be in the chat interacting with people, and feel free to put your thoughts in the main text chat as well, because I think that's fun. Okay, so we're going to be going over a lot of questions of adults, because how adults respond to your teenagers are going to make a big difference. Here's just a brief overview of the kinds of questions we're going to be covering. And so we need to talk about the assumptions about teens, which is tied into that expectations category we saw earlier. So, what are teens in your universe assumed to be good at or really bad at? For example, the modern assumptions about teens are that teens are really good with technology and really bad at doing anything that's not technology. So a lot of adults would have a really difficult time taking advice or leadership from a teen when it comes to just about anything else but tech. And they're probably going to assume that if the younger a person is on like a panel or teaching about tech, the more reliable people tend to see them, even though that's definitely not the case, but that's just the general assumption that we have, and it's going to shape your teenager's world. So, another thing you need to keep in mind is, do adults in your world, in your story, feel excitement or dread when thinking about the future of teenagers? And this can be a really this can have a really strong effect on your character's psyche, because they can both be really damaging in different ways. Which brings us to the last question: how do your teens feel about themselves? So we're going to take a couple minutes, and you're going to, talk with your buddy about these questions. And I'm going to sit back and let you do that. Okay, so I hope you were able to establish a little bit more about the assumptions that people have about the teenagers in your story. Okay, so now we need to talk about who your teenagers are in charge of. So, I am just going to share a little bit of my experience here and the differences that I noticed depending on how I ended up being put in charge. So with the event that I started when I was 15, there was already an event that was very similar to it, but it was meant for boys. And I wanted something like that, but for young girls. And so I started pulling a bunch of people together. And I was like 14, 15, and said, hey, we're going to make this event. We're going to do it. And it's going to be really, really fun. And I didn't know what I was doing, but the organizers of the event that I was kind of like copycatting kind of saw it, and they were like, hey, we'll help you, and you can kind of come join us. And it was really exciting, and I got to be in charge of a lot of things, and a lot of people, a lot of adults, a lot of teenagers. But at the end of that experience, they were like, hey, that was really great that you came up with this idea and set up the structure for this, but we're going to have to separate ourselves from you, and you are free to continue to join this event, but we can't let you be in charge anymore. And that was really devastating for me at the time, but now I understand exactly why they did it. Because I was 15 and I didn't know what I was doing. I was messing a lot of things up, and that's kind of how things will go. Like, I wasn't sure how to delegate particular things to adults. A lot of social cues and things about just general, like, niceness was harder for me to grasp. There were things that I wasn't super reliable with, because I'm 15. 15. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was eventually a very wise decision for them to remove me from that decision-making process. Now, there are other 15-year-olds who would have been immensely competent and would have likely been able to stay in that position. I was not competent. And yeah. So if your teenager is in control of other adults, they have adults that are responding to them, the adults will usually try to either control the teen and use them as their puppet, or they will try to get rid of them. And this is not a good guy, bad guy kind of thing. This is just something that happens because teenagers are generally not fit in the way that adults it's just a mess, and it's just a smart choice from the perspective of the adults to remove them or control them. Something weird can happen, and it's like a weird reverence or worship can come when you have like prodigy leaders who are teens. Like Joan of Arc is a really good example of this. Also someone that they got rid of. Just saying. Where adults will they'll forget that they're a teenager, or they'll just kind of like obsess over the fact that, wow, this person is so young and they're accomplishing so many things and they're, wise beyond their years, and we're going to fixate on that. When I was 19, I was a member of my church's clergy for about a year and a half. And and that section of clergy I was in was composed of 18 and 19-year-olds almost exclusively. And we had a lot of respect from the other members of our congregation, and we were asked to do a lot of things, and there were a lot of responsibilities. But oftentimes, it was almost too much reverence and respect, and people didn't understand that we were still people and still teenagers. It was really weird. If you want more clarifications, I'm free to talk about them in chat. And another thing that I want to mention just really quickly is how common it is for teenagers to just be a puppet or a figurehead of an organization, instead of actually being in charge. This happens a lot. One thing that I really did enjoy about the Hunger Games books was the role that Katniss played in the revolution, because she was not actually in charge, because of course the adults didn't trust her to hand over all their plans, but she was a very powerful figurehead. And oftentimes in big settings like that, that's where teens will more likely be, is as a puppet or a figurehead. And if they don't like that, and if they try to step out of their place, things can get messy. Okay, so who benefits from teen leadership? Because there are going to be a lot of people who benefit and a lot of people who don't benefit. So let's roll it back a little bit and talk about why your teen ended up being in a leadership position in the first place. So with that first example that I gave where I helped start an event at 15, I was in that position because I kind of had started it. It was my idea. I came up with all the structure and how the event would be run, and it was not... They felt bad about kicking me out initially, as soon as I had it. They waited for the first year to happen, the first event to be over, and then I was gently escorted off screen. But they still had, in that event, and they still do, a big draw is that other teenagers can come and they will be in charge of other kids, and it's seen as a big leadership opportunity for the teenagers. And it's a learning experience, and it's super cool. But the main difference is that they're never placed in charge of adults, really. With like maybe a couple of exceptions. But usually, even when there are adults there, they're just there to supervise and they're like as a backup measure in case the teen does something wrong. And things go awry, where like the teen feels like they're in charge and they're getting that experience, but there's always that safety net, which is actually a really smart thing to do. Just because I feel like teenagers do need that safety net, and if you're providing a learning and growing experience, you need to provide a safe way for them to make mistakes and mess up and not have everything be totally ruined. When I was on the creative board of directors for a week-long science camp, we'll just call it that, it was really interesting because we were doing a lot of the work for the story that was involved in this science camp. And we were deciding the schedule for what the different participants would be doing from day to day. And the head honcho was in charge of logistics and like food and planning and stuff and other things. And there were a couple of adult leaders who would be in charge of different groups of kids. But the board of creative directors was composed entirely of teenagers. Like, I think the oldest one of us at the time was maybe 17. We were all pretty young. And we were also all volunteers. So the head honcho didn't have to pay us. And there was another benefit that came from this. The head honcho's daughter was on the team, and as a coincidence, all of the other people on that creative board of directors were also her teenage daughter's friends. We were all really, really good friends with her. So the head honcho was able to cut costs and give these teenagers a really good experience. The head honcho didn't have to provide a lot of like creative stuff, I guess, for their event. And she was able to provide a consistent social space for her daughter with people that she knew and trusted. So, yeah. And it was good. And then there was my self-help company, and the people who benefited from us being in charge were us. And since we were our own company, no one could really tell us what to do. And no adult could come up and be like, hey, this isn't how it's supposed to be, because we were our own entity. We could do what we wanted, and it was really fun. So, one last thing. Are your teens pawns or puppets? Now, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's something that's really important for you to consider about your character. And are they a pawn? Are they a puppet? Are they aware that that's what's going on? Because teenagers are often a lot younger, and they're very smart, but they often don't have as much experience with being manipulated, and they can be manipulated pretty easily. And if they're in a position of power, then everyone's going to be trying to get control of that teen and get in their head and get them to do what they want. Okay, so another thing we need to keep in mind is your teen's personal reasons for staying in charge. Because the thing is, like, if you have a teenager who is in charge of something, there is almost always an easy way out, because even if they are in a royal position like we were talking about earlier, everyone has died and they're the oldest heir and they're 15, usually there are things set in place where a temporary ruler can be there until they come of age. Those are usually options for teenagers. So why are they still here? Because there's almost certainly a bunch of people who are ready to remove them from power. or at least to put in a teen who's more qualified and is better at listening. I don't know. So I'll share my own personal reasons for why I stayed in charge of all of those things. And it was a big combination. But first of all, I really liked attention. And I liked feeling important, like straight up. And I had parents who always talked about how we were the next generation and we were chosen to be in this world at this time for a reason, and we could do big important things and we didn't have to wait to be older. And that really seemed appealing to me. And I would read all these books about people like Joan of Arc and other teen leaders throughout the past, and I wanted that attention and I wanted that praise. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was ousted from that first, from being in charge of that first event I created. And I still continue to volunteer for it for a long time. And then when I was 19, they actually, reinstated me for a year, which was a big deal because, there's the top youth leader position, I guess, that changes every year, and you're only supposed to be in it 1 year, and I was the only person who's able to do it twice. And I think it's because when I started out and I was 15, I was doing it for all the wrong reasons. I was really, really selfish about it, and just my heart wasn't in the right place. And as I got older and I was able to mature a little bit more emotionally and start doing things for other people and less for myself, they were very generous and decided to give me a second chance. Because, even when I did start, don't get me wrong, I did care about people. I did care about giving the people at this event a good experience, but I also just really liked attention. And it's okay for that to be a motivation of your teenagers in your story. And they can have that where they like attention and they're doing it for a negative reason and a positive reason as well. Humans are complex brain meat, and they like it's not just and or, yes or no. Oftentimes there's a big mix. You see what I'm saying? There's lots of different things where complex have multiple reasons. Happy and sad are not exclusive emotions. Anyway, so, yeah. Are they a spite gremlin? Because sometimes I've seen a lot of teens who decided to be in charge of things and lead revolutions or do stuff because of spite. So in the election, I think you'll remember how that went, the 2020 election, and you'll remember the different candidates that were there and how different groups felt about them. And I think it's no secret that our past president was not very popular with the young crowd. At all. And there was a group of fans of K-pop who got together. So these are mostly it includes people from all sorts of demographics, but these are mostly teenage girls, right? And they got together and they decided to buy tickets to a Trump rally. And they bought thousands of these tickets and then just didn't show up. So no one was able to go to the rally. And that was something that required a lot of leadership, maybe not a ton of leadership and coordination, but it's still required. It's required someone to take charge and for the message to spread. And the motivation there was pure spite. And also, the main political motivations that group had, which I won't go into detail here because that's not my place. Yeah. So think about the motives that your teen has and go ahead and talk to your buddy again. So whoever talked least last time gets to talk first this time, and they get to talk about why the teen in their story is continuing to be in charge. And it's okay if your answers change as you're, like, discussing, like, none of this is set in stone. You're just having fun. Alright, let's move on. Okay, so misconceptions. Which ties into, like, the competency stripe of the big three that we talked about earlier. And misconceptions are not unique to just teenagers. Obviously, everyone has misconceptions. But especially younger people, because they haven't been around for as long. So, what misconceptions do your teen characters have? And are these advantages or disadvantages? Because sometimes having an individual who just, like, doesn't know that something is impossible, but just does it anyway because they don't know that it shouldn't be able to happen, they'll do it, and they'll do some really crazy, amazing things. But there are a lot of disadvantages that can come from misconceptions as well. So I'm going to share an example of a big misconception I had when I was on that board of creative directors. So like I said before, we were all volunteers, all the teenagers on that board of directors who were friends of the head honcho's daughter. And we had a great time. And I knew that this event we were working on, this science camp, made money, and that the head honcho was the sole breadwinner for her family at the time. And I don't know where this idea came from, because it was never told to us, it wasn't implied, but I thought this was how she made her money for, like, the entire year. Like, this was where her entire yearly income came from. And I thought, if we don't do a good job with this event, if it's a crappy event, if we don't sell enough tickets, if the story is awful, and we don't do good enough at marketing and advertising, because we were also in charge of marketing and advertising, then no one will come, and then head honcho won't get any money, and then my friend will be homeless and starving, and it will be my fault. Now, this was obviously, like, not true at all. Like, I don't even think this event was meant to be profitable. I think it paid for itself, and that was about it. Like, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that's how it went. But that misconception provided a lot of stress for me, and there was never an opportunity for it to be corrected, because I just assumed that's what everyone else knew, and that's how we were all functioning. So I never talked about it, and just kept being super, super stressed over this thing that I did not need to be as stressed about. So, yeah. And the younger a person is, the more likely they are going to have misconceptions. Normally we'd have you talk to your buddy about this, but we're not going to, because we need to speed through these last slides. So, let's talk about competency really quick. So, is your character actually competent? The thing is, I personally was not, but there are a ton of competent teenagers out there. In fact, think of something that you consider yourself to be really good at, and there is a teenager out there who is better at it than you are. That's just kind of how it goes. So, competent teenagers exist, but there's consequences for that. And, like, yeah. So, here are some possible unintended consequences from a teenager or child being in charge and having a lot of pressure and stress put on them. So, and the younger they are, and the more intense their responsibilities, the more severe this tends to be. So I don't have time to go over every single one of these, but all of these are really common that I've seen them a lot in myself and just people I've worked with who had a lot of like stress and pressure. And again, like I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but these are just things that I've noticed that are really common. So we are just about out of time. So I don't have a ton of time to talk about my personal experience, but if you have any questions about any of the things that I talked about, then go ahead and just like shoot me a private message. I'll be available on the Discord for forever, actually. I'm on Discord a lot. So just really quickly, I just want to stress that cultures and environments matter and will greatly affect the different ways that your teen will interact with their responsibilities. So keep that in mind and make sure you have a really good idea of the culture and environment that they're in, because it'll just be so different. Okay, so in conclusion, do I think it is bad for teenagers to be in charge of stuff? Not at all. Not at all. I don't regret any of my time, like, being in charge, and honestly, I experienced almost just unconditional support in my experience. I know that's not how it always is, and it's probably not how it will be in your stories, but I didn't want to scare anyone off from, like, letting their teenagers take charge of things. So, thank you for attending this presentation. I'm really sad that I couldn't do it live, but, I'm glad that I was able to do something. So that is my personal email. You're free to send me questions, or just comments, or like your own experiences, or whatever. So, thank you, and I hope to be hearing from you.